leaked reports show us that torture is happening with much more increased veracity than we ever thought possible before. We think it's high time we did something about it. But before we do anything in this debate, let's establish one thing first. Torture is incredibly bad. Torture sucks for a variety of reasons. One, because it's often innocent people that we capture in torture, and subjecting innocent people to great amounts of pain is bad in of itself. But even in the instance where you actually get your hands on a real-life terrorist, way to go, there's a reason why it's still non-utilitarian or counterproductive to torture them. Firstly, because a lot of the times these terrorists are trained to withstand huge amounts of pain and don't yield any information. But to the extent that they don't, they still often don't know anything. Big terrorist organizations often mech out the harms by not telling their subordinates information that could be pivotal to the war effort, so you don't yield actual things from them. But more, the information that they might have could be outdated, and often they're incentivized to lie to you. But worse than all of that is putting people under extreme pain means you're not thinking straight. And we have to ask, what is the validity or the value of the information you're getting from someone under heavy duress who's screaming at you facts that are probably outdated and untrue to get you to stop putting pain on him. We think all of this means is you're likely to get worse information that leads to worse decisions in the theater of combat, leading to maybe more people being caught in the crossfire or your war being prolonged. Or two, you're likely to, in the best case, not get any proper information at all. No, thank you. But even if there is some information to be gotten from torturing terrorists, we think the minimal harm by the perpetrator are central in. If you don't believe any of this, at least remember that there is international recognition that torture is illegal and bad. Article 3 and 21, no thank you, of the Geneva Convention and the Charter Against Torture, which signed by the US but not ratified. Let's be clear, they never ratify anything. But it's recognized, globally shut down the institution of torture. Therefore, our policy is very simple. By disincentivizing doctors to be involved in torture, we remove the ability of torture to split your panel of bringing people back to life is, the more you are able to push people closer to death. We think to get rid of this panel of experts is great. Secondly, because we think doctors have the ability to hide bruises and make torture that much harder to prove and track, thus decreasing its accountability. More on that later. All these harms are ideally stamped out or at least greatly reduced by our policy. So first and foremost, let me tell you why the policy will work. Why will doctors comply with the policy we have today? Before I do that, though, I'm happy to take a few.
Even if you revoke their medical licenses, what is there to stop this government from hiring medical professionals, even though they are unlicensed, to help treat these victims?
Now to my first point. Why will doctors comply, and why will this policy be beneficial? Thanks. So first, remember that by virtue of being a doctor, you have the knowledge by virtue of learning all of this stuff that governments want to access so that they can utilize you in the torture initiative. Now, although there's oftentimes high payoffs involved in getting you to come and contribute to a government torture program, we think that if you're a doctor, the calculus is this. The payoff that you get from being involved in, say, a Guantanamo Bay torture scheme is one-off compared to the payoff you will get from a long, extended career of being a doctor with a medical license. We think the career in that sense is more profitable and is likely to be more valuable to me as a doctor. That's why I will prefer to keep my license. But secondly, if I get caught, there is an incredibly high penalty, and that's going to deter me from wanting to do it because my credibility of doctor, my ability to make money as a doctor depends on my reputation. And so at a point in which I'm proven to be an irreputable, a doctor of ill repute, I'm likely to get less patients in the future and things like that, should I be discovered to have engaged in it. That's a deterrent from me doing it undercover because the penalty is so big. But lastly, because we think right now, doctors think it's okay for them to use their professional abilities to harm people because they think they're just bringing them back to life. True, bringing them back to life to continually be harmed, but we think the reason they do it is because the vast majority of people don't see it as wrong. Once we have our policy in place, we believe that people are inherently good, and if that there's clear messages that you shouldn't do this, most doctors are likely not to do it anyway. We think that, no thank you, if governments are going to hire doctors under the carpet, at least that's a lot less doctors than you'll be getting from the people that have gotten their actual medical licenses that now no longer will be involved in this malpractice. But now let me tell you why this is malpractice. Why is torture so much more harmful with doctors than it is without doctors? Doctors play a variety of roles. in torture. The worst of them, of course, is that doctors oftentimes, with their medical expertise, come up with new and innovative ways to hurt people. Things like anal rehydration was a product of intense medical research conducted by doctors, which is an excellent way to torture people because it hurts, it keeps you alive. Please be clear, when you're dead, you're alive. It's incredibly painful and it leaves no bruises. Things like sense deprivation are all new methods of torture that doctors have invented. So we think keeping doctors out of the arena of torture is good because it stops us from innovating pain. No, thank you. But secondly, more harm can be inflicted to a person that's currently undergoing torture when there's always this overbearing safety net that at least we have medical staff on hand to bring him back. We are less reserved about the pain we inflict on an individual when we know that the individual isn't likely to die. It's always not in my best interest as a government to have the person I'm torturing die. Not just because I cease to be able to obtain information, but also because I will come under intense scrutiny and pressure, and that's always bad. So given this, given that I no longer have doctors, we think the benefit is torturers, if they decide to continue to torture people, no longer feel like they have a safety net. They now have to exert a lot more caution in the pain that they inflict, which we think translates into less pain being inflicted. If less pain is inflicted, that's always good, but in the best case, no pain will be inflicted because they realize that the risk of killing this guy is just too great. Let's not do it. But secondly, though, the worst thing about doctors being involved is able to guarantee. So makes torture times, things like anal rehydration don't leave bruise out of being tortured. Ali comes to the global stage and says, the United States government has tortured me. Nobody believes him because he's got no bruises to show for it. He's got no evidence to say Guantanamo Bay was not just a detention center. It was really bad. So we think once you let them go, they have bruises. If they die, we start questioning those things. At that point, do we start pressuring the government? We are okay with Ali dying. Because if his death means that more people in the future don't have to die, if it means more pressure on the institution of torture, if it means torture is less likely to happen, we are so proud to propose. The problem that they had in today's society, the CIA has been conducting torture. Well, that's really not the debate in today's case. We are not here to debate whether torture is necessary, whether torture is bad or wrong. But if they wanted to solve torture, then they needed to prove first. Why by stripping the license of a few doctors will stop torture? Well, they only had two part of their argument. Firstly, on why doctors would comply, and secondly, why would it be worse with the presence of doctor? Here's how I'm going to deal with it. Firstly, he started out his speech by saying that nation terrorists are strong. We say no. If it is very much ineffective, the government, the United States of America, would have stopped this practice long ago. They realized that there are some marginal benefits or information that they will get. But even then, we do not want to be dragged into that sort of debate because we are here to we are the side who tell our stance is today. Our case into this debate is a simple one. Torture is going to happen either way, under your side, under my side. The question is, what do we do then? We want the doctors to be there to ensure that these people who are being tortured, are given the necessary medical attention that they need and are ensured that their lives are ensured that they do not die in the process of being tortured. Before any of that, let's deal with his case. So he wanted to talk about why doctors would comply to this and that doctors wouldn't want to do this because it would deter them. They would lose their license and therefore they would enjoy benefits of having long terms and things like that. We tell you no. Torture will never stop. It's an ongoing process. It's not like in the next year torture is going to stop. It will go on for the next 50 and 100 years. So these services will always be there. Their services will always be required, will always be needed by the government. the government will always pay them. So it's not like when you engage in torture, it's not like it's a one-sum payment. No, torture happens continuously. You could be a torture agent for 10, 20 years, you will still get paid. But even if the doctors would comply and doctors are not involved in this torture process, we say no, it will be way off worse because we want these doctors to be there. If the doctors are there, tortures are still going to happen, because here's where I'm going to argue to you the importance of why the government would have the impetus to do this. Because you need to understand, the governments are torturing not because it's for fun or because they like to torture. We're just doing this as a sense of retribution. No, we're doing this because of the interest of our people, the national security. Therefore, it will happen either way. And without doctors, what's more likely to happen is you have your black ops, you have your hardliners, Rainbow, who will be torturing these guys. And how does this torture occur? In brutal ways. They will be pushed until the verge of dying. And what? They'll be pushed until the verge of dying. And why do we need these doctors? Because they are the only one with the capability and ability to ensure that that person who's being tortured does not die. Sure, you might bring him back to life to torture even more, but at least we are not killing him. We want him to be alive. Why is this so? Why is this so? It's pretty much very simple. Because the state is not a bunch of killers who are out there to punish people. The question is this. It is going to happen either, because they are arguing to you that without doctors being in the process, torture would not happen. And that was his second point on why is it worse. Here's where I'm going to deal with it. Because he came up here and told us doctors are the reasons of new inventions or anal dehydration. They have been creating new methods of tortures. But we tell you this. Torture is going to happen either way. The question is, who do you want it to do? Which methods are you going to pursue? Are you going to pursue methods that are created by doctors who knows what's best, who knows that the patient wouldn't die? Or are you going to go forward with sort of torture that is conducted by people with no medical license, people with no medical expertise, or people who are just there to torture? And that's what we don't want. We want the doctors to be there. Yes?
Why is the equation of death to harmonization, when individuals involved in torture psychologically get traumatized, where doctors innovate and innovate all types of pain? Why is that a lot worse or a lot better than causing harm and killing the person?
Because when you die, it's the end. You can't move forward from that. Even if you have psychological effects, whatnot, it can still be fixed. You cannot come up here and argue to me that it will, if you have psychological scars, it cannot be fixed. Nothing is at the point of where you cannot rally. You can always be fixed. So that's what we want. We do not want to put a full stop and then say, oh, your people are going to place it down, sir. So, secondly, here's where I move into my substantive. Let's talk about the practical outcome and why their policy wouldn't even be useful. Because you need to understand, I've already explained to you why the government would have the impetus to torture and why it would happen either way. Number one, what the government would probably do is keep them off the books and you wouldn't track them. Even if the government doesn't do that, secondly, let's say if we follow, please sit down, so we follow their policy, and you strip these people of their license. And this is the point where he didn't engage with my speaker's POI. Because the government would want these people to be in the process. The government would want the doctors to ensure that these patients are alive. Even if you strip their license, their service will still be needed. Because why? They will still have the knowledge, they will still have the expertise that they have. And the government would still have the impetus to call them back and to work for the government, to keep torturing these people. And why is that harmful? Because right now, they do not have a license. They have no other options. They cannot opt out of the system. Their only source of income, their only dependent is from the government. Juxtapose this with them having a medical license. With them having a medical license, let's say if there's unnecessary torturing, extreme torturing, such as sexual humiliation of religion, public will get involved in. And those things could because the government would have to take a stance to reduce the severity or to ensure that no unnecessary torture is going to happen during the process. But right now, without a license, you have no reports or whatsoever, because people who are being called by the government to torture these guys could not opt out of the system because they do not have a medical license to even begin with. Lastly, the last probable outcome that will come under their policy is that they will have no medical personnel at all. And we find this to be totally unacceptable. Why? Because when torture happens, you need a medical personnel there to ensure that the person is not dying, the person does not die, and the person is given the necessary care afterwards, after torture is done. Because under their paradigm, after torture is being done, after we have already garnered every information we want out of the individual, what do you do then? Do you treat the patient? Or do we just deny him the right for medical care? We are the side who's going to treat the patient and tell you that we are torturing you not because for fun or not because we want to show an act of retribution. We are torturing you to protect the interests of our nation. And after who would deny these people, victims who are being tortured, the necessary medical treatment. And they are the side who's willing to stand by idly while the person is being tortured to death because there's no medical official, no medical personnel with the expertise to ensure that that individual does not die. I'm very proud to.
Two issues in today's debate that I'll tackle, and my substantive will be integrated as well. Firstly, will this policy actually stop or at least mitigate the damage caused by torture? And secondly, the basic question of feasibility that they try to pose to us, will doctors actually comply and why they would in this circumstance? Firstly, let's assume their best case where torture is good, torture is great, and where these individuals actually have some information that we need. Under those circumstances, would torture still happen under our side? We say firstly, when doctors don't participate, let's assume that feasibility exists first, right? Because this is a more important issue. Like when doctors don't participate, it's much harder for torture to happen to begin with. Because let's understand this, capturing the terrorists to begin with was extremely hard. It took a lot of effort, money, and all those things in the war effort, right? That's the first case. So when we got this terrorist, what you guys want out of him is the information. Right now, if you intend to bruise the person or punch the person until he's on the brink of death, to get the person to reveal the information, you have to have a medical professional there, or have someone in case he happens to die. But what happens now when you don't have that, to be more cautious at the worst case, because you refuse to punch him till he is about to die or bleed, to reveal the information, because you want that information to be garnered through other safer methods. Because punching him under your side would mean that you risk this person dying without you getting any information at all, compared to other alternatives that you may have in terms of other interrogation methods which do not consist of you having to torture them. Like, I don't know what kind of torture methods you have because I claim they don't have information anyways, but if that's your case where you claim that no alternative anyways. But secondly, because these agents of torture will be unwilling to push you to the limits where you want to be, what happens then? There are two things that may possibly happen. Firstly, they'll be cautious, like how I said. So at least under the circumstance where they do get tortured to some extent, firstly, it won't be to an extent where they're bruised on the brink of death or like have some sort of psychological trauma. At the very least, these individuals can have some form of quality of life. But secondly, we talked about bruises and fatalities as well, and this is something that dismissed totally, right? We said that individuals who come out of Guantanamo Bay post-torture, individuals who are victims of torture, one believes them, it's very easy to bodies. And when they come out and claim that the US government to refute these claims, what happens now is that you have bruises and you have actual bodily, even if no one trusts you, there's some visceral reaction towards the bruises on your body, or there's at least some evidence that something happened to you in the process of you being in Guantanamo Bay. And that's far more reliable than you having no bruises at all and claiming that someone tortured you in the process. So at least under our side, more people get awareness and more people trust the information being proposed by the victims of torture, that the US government tortured them. At least some investigation, more pressure to investigate on the events of torture can go on under our side. So, okay, I'll take you before moving on, yeah.
Firstly, other than torture, how will this government use safer methods to get this information?
Right.
Secondly,
right, so I agree that torture under your side, we claim there's no information to begin from torture to begin with. But let's say what will happen under our side, right? We can engage like how US and Israel engage in intelligence reports, right? Or other than that, we can embed our own individuals within terrorist camps or things like that, right? We don't need to go to the extent of torture to get the information which you want, which we claim the information doesn't exist to begin with. Because like Nishan told you, right, terrorists are trained to withstand torture. The information is usually outdated because terrorists have several plans. Don't just make one plan and all the soldiers know that one plan. There are several plans, so upon a soldier getting captured, that they'll just change their plans, things like that, right? So you don't believe the information is reliable to begin with. Anyway, so your torture is redundant to begin with, and you
involving doctors is just making the harm even worse. So we think that at least in our worst case, it will mitigate the damage caused by tortures under this issue. It may not stop, that's our case, it may not stop at the end of the day. That's our worst case. But at least people who are involved in torture will be more cautious when they commit towards these methods, or otherwise the valuable information that they intend to get will just not exist because they just end up killing the individual anyways. So that is a harm that definitely won't benefit your side. Secondly, why will doctors comply? Because they claim that it's unfeasible that these things will happen anyways. Look, doctors are usually involved not only in the profession of torturing people, but they also usually have their own clinics or usually work in hospitals as well, or other ways that they can treat people as well. Torture, like what Nishan said, is usually a one-off. So the money you can gain from torturing under this one event is far lesser than you can gain throughout your lifetime, where you have your license to be with you and you can work in a hospital clinic and get more money from those who then do not have a medical profession will just be less reliable. So even if you want to hire them for torture under those circumstances, or you want to keep them for torture, the agents of torture will be less likely to trust these individuals then, because these individuals do not have medical profession. Because like understanding your logic here that these individuals are now stripped of this, even people from the public will be less likely to trust this medical people. Will come out and say that, like you guys think, people will come out and say and give reports that, hey, we were involved in this torture process. People are less likely to trust you because you don't have the medical license then. And secondly, it's unbelievable that if a government intends to capture you, not capture, like keep you in terms of torturing these individuals, why would you then come out and leak the information then if you are involved in a torture process anyway and you're complicit in that process anyway? So it's unlikely that your claim that these individuals who are involved in torture, these doctors who are involved in tortures, will come out and reveal the information upon torturing any individual then. So we don't think that will happen. But look, if you practice without a license, the simplest thing that we can do if the government intends to keep you there is we'll just charge you in court, right? We don't think you should practice without a license anyways, even if it's in terms of torturing and resuscitating an individual. So we don't think under those circumstances, individuals will then comply because they'll end up harming themselves anyway. So at the end of the day, the doctors will comply to this policy, therefore creating the pressure that we wanted to garner in the first place. Lastly, this very basic thing of doctors' involvement, right? Nishan told you initially that doctors being involved allows individuals or agents of torture to take torture to a whole new level or more severe level. What happens under this circumstance is this, right? That even though you intend to gain information out of these individuals, most of the time you don't. But what happens is sometimes this individual doesn't know anything, or sometimes they refuse to reveal anything. But you continue to bruise him and continue to hurt him under this circumstance. What happens now is the medical profession is complicit in this continual harm under this circumstance. What we want from the medical profession is not someone who is involved in certain harms, but someone who saves lives. We think that torture taints the image of doctors as a whole. We don't think the medical profession should be tainted with this image in any way, because we think doctors' involvement only harms the way people perceive how doctors in general life treat individuals per se. So we think a perfect, clean image of doctors is far better than a tainted one anyways at the end of the day. Because even if you have a doctor at your friendly neighborhood or a doctor in a hospital, if you never know if he's somehow involved in some form of torture anyway. So at the end of the day, at least a tainted one would be far more, we don't want a tainted one at the end of the day. Very glad to propose.
Mr. Speaker, we think that they have a funky case coming from inside governments. I will first tackle about 3 rebuttals coming from the 2 first speakers as a whole. Firstly, they wanted a more safer method to deal with terrorists, right? Because we really don't know whether they're okay with torture or not, or whether they're not okay with it. Because at first, in the first speech, of the Prime Minister, he said that torture is bad, we don't want torture, we want to do away with torture. In a second speech, we heard that even if torture is still there, we want safer methods, right? Major contradiction. We really don't know their stance. Two responses to these safer methods. Firstly, in the Prime Minister's speech, he said, terrorists are people who can withstand grievous pain, and you want safer method. You want them to lessen down their impact and how they hit these terrorists. Funny, even if your safer method works, right? If terrorists know that you're going to be lenient with them, if terrorists know that you're going to, not touch them at all, and you will rather have them die, they're fine with that because they don't want to give even information at the end of the day. But if you don't hit them at all, they will also not give you information at the end of the day. So we really don't think that their entire safer method would solve terrorism or solve torture as a whole. Second point, they want bruises to be shown, right, on the body of these terrorists, right? They want people to believe that they have been tortured by United States of America in Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo Bay. They don't want doctors for that matter. But we say that scars don't just go away, right? We tell you that even if they come out, they're still traumatized. They still go through physical and psychological harm. They can become mad, Mr. Speaker. These are all tangible harms that can still be seen by being hit in the torture camp. No, thank you. Third point of rebuttal, they say the information from these terrorists are invaluable through torture because, you know what, at that point of time, in the heat of the moment, they may give you wrong information or they may lie to you. Two responses. Firstly, then why did government even put this as a form of practice in the 1950s? Because they realized this was the only way to deal with terrorists because of the psyche that these terrorists have, right? Second point of response. Even if you use intelligence report, who gives these intelligence reports? Rebels and their own defective terrorists are the ones giving you this information. So who do you then rely on? If information was your main contention, then under your paradigm, it can never be valuable at the end of the day using your premise. Fourth rebuttal, they said that, oh, it taints the image of doctors when they're involved in these torture chambers, right? And then they even told us that doctors' livelihood depends on the reputation from public, right? Then why would they reveal to the public that they've been involved in torture chambers? Why would they tell people that, they were torturing people? If they're so worried about reputation, if their whole career path and your whole livelihood depends on reputation, how people perceive them, why would they go out openly and tell them? That was something that came up from the Prime Minister's speech, contradictory in a second level. No, thank you. They said that, now we will pending the United States of America to stop this torture practice, right? And then in the Prime Minister's speech, he told us that they're not signatories to the Geneva Convention. So what is this binding force now that you're inflicting onto the United States of America to stop torture? He even cited the wrong article, for God's sake. The last point of rebuttal on their case, right? They said that, undercover people you will never know, right, if they're involved in these torture chambers or not. Then how can there be ill reputation when doctors don't openly come and tell people that they have been involved in torture chambers, or when these people, when they come out and they tell people that, they have tortured people and stuff like that? How would people then, they don't really have a medical license to begin with? They don't have credibility and they have no point to prove to people that they've been involved in this torture chamber. My 2 points before I take you is the principle existence of a doctor and that their policy is an illegitimate act of the government. Yes, go on.
Well, that's establish a stance on torture. If you are against torture, then you are against the doctors and allow torture to be perpetuated for an individual. But if you are for torture, then you need to start engaging at least more wholly by 7 layers of why torture not only doesn't yield you information, but it yields you counterproductive information. How do you feel about torture?
We understand that torture will happen inevitably. Violence will still happen. War on torture still occurs in status quo since the 1950s. It's not a problem that can be solved under both sides of today. You took up that burden. You need to tell us by revoking the doctor's license in performing torture or assisting or giving medical treatment in the torture chamber can solve the problem of to other doctors to enter into this practice. My first point, the principal existence of a doctor. It is a doctor's personal belief to heal, provide treatment, and save lives, right? This is why they upheld the Hippocratic Oath. There's an inherent need for doctors, when they opt into this line of job, to put the lives of people ahead of them, as they uphold to this principle of service before self. We draw a parallel of torture to wartime, right? Tactics during wartime. No, ma'am, no thank you. Doctors didn't start the war, okay? Doctors are not involved in contributing to a criminal's right. We think that the doctor at that point of time still goes in to treat people. The doctor still has that inherent principle that he upholds to then treat people during a time of war. By government's policy, doctors should be abstained from going into war zones to offer immediate medical attention under their case, right? Because we already told you, and even the second speaker clarified scenario in a torture chamber. This is because they resuscitate or they give CPR to these torture victims simply because they don't want them to die. We are more humanitarian in nature. We want them to go through due process, Mr. Speaker. We're okay with them not dying. We put them through the criminal law justice for all that matter. But even if they die, we don't want. We want doctors to save them. Give them resuscitation at the brink of their death. We think that doctors are the most humane people. They are uphold in society as healers of the society. We think it's particularly important that they're involved in scenarios such as this. In both wartime and a torturous situation, doctors do not cause it, and people are still suffering. That is why humanitarian aid workers still go in. That is why doctors who uphold the same constitution, the life mantra that they still uphold, they still go in to save these people. My last point, this government's policy is an illegitimate act because they actively prevents doctors assistance. They now can dictate which version of the Hippocratic Oath a doctor should follow, whether the doctor's principles should be negated or should be nullified at the expense of government's policy of national security to refrain from engaging in saving the lives of these people in torture to resuscitate them. Government should never brainwash a healer's institution or hold a gun to their head and threaten them and have them decide which version of the Hippocratic Oath they practice. First, saving victims, treating anyone in need for that matter, or secondly, being a puppet to government's interest to not be present in interrogation rooms and to allow these people to die. That goes against the very principle of their existence. This all goes against the whole medical institution as a whole. We're not okay with that. We recognize that torture still happens. We think that our side better facilitates torture and the end results of it. Thank you.
Okay. And the second portion of the case, and I invite Alvin here.
There are three issues in this. First, is torture if an injury happened with our model? Is but third about what is the of doctors and that. First, we start is legitimate. Something right with it. The US has been doing a lot of things since the 1950s, but that does not mean they've been doing it right. Recently, we wanted to shut down Guantanamo Bay. Recently, we had the Senate committee report that came out against Bush and his administration not having accountability about it. Recently, we clamped down on the NSA. Recently, we've also taken a stance against a lot of methods that were incorporated in Guantanamo Bay, where we opposed hunger strikes, where we force-fed prisoners. The USA is not the beyond and end-all of what is right. Just because something has been done does not mean it should continue to be done. But the second thing she questioned us was, well, what is your alternative to this? So the first thing we will say is do everything you can except for torturing these individuals. Gather intelligence, cooperate with other people, go on surveillance, do anything and everything you can, but you should not torture these individuals. The reasons we gave you were pretty simple. We think torture is counterintuitive to believe it will work. If information is not wrong, information is counterintuitive. If the information is right, you make martyrs out of these individuals, where they're seen as people who live for their religion or people who are essentially the most extreme versions that have gone through the pain and torture. So not only do you make it worse for the potential for terrorists, you make it worse for the current situation on the ground, where they're perversely incentive to lead people off the track and not give information related to the bomb that is going to explode. So terrorists, torturing terrorists, is not the method government should employ in ensuring their interests. So the second question we must ask is, will torture happen under our model? So the first thing they said was hardline CIA operatives and people who work for the government will carry it out anyway, because there's an incentive for government to get information. This is the best way to do information. So the first thing we have to ask is, if there's an incentive if that's the case, do we say things like, right? Because if you are not alive, you are dead, and therefore your scenario is torture will be more cautious. You won't hit the guy to death. You know that upon you acting in a very brutal manner, you could no longer be part of the the mission. Therefore, at the very least, Mr. Speaker, you won't hurt that guy as much. But we argue in a lot of instances where you don't know where the breaking point of a human is, because it's very, very objective in nature, because you don't know what this terrorist has gone to. You won't torture the terrorist at all. So we think at the very least, we have minimized harm. At the best, we think we can prevent this torture from it. But let's flip it. Even if you torture these people and you say these people are hardline Republicans who want to kill everybody on the ground, we said that's great. If indeed they do torture these terrorists and they bruise them up and they beat them up, we think that's the best and most accountable structure to send them to court. When you cannot ascertain psychological harm, when no one is inclined to believe a Yemeni individual who is going to sue the US government, we think if you have bruises and you are scarred from being involved in Guantanamo Bay, that's the best form of accountability. But let's juxtapose that to side opposition. How are you going to create accountability when that person only goes to anal rehydration continuously, or the person gets beaten up but stitched again and again? How is that a more accountable structure? We said this is a lot more accountable structure at the very least. But the second thing under this issue was, is indeed the removal of torture viable without doctors? Because then they asked us, doctors will do it anyway. What is the incentive for doctors to not be involved within this scenario? So the first thing we will say is, if we strip you of your license and you continue to practice, the International Medical Board of this world will obviously make sure that you do not be sent to jail. We can have a civil lawsuit against you. But the second thing we will say is, if you don't have a license and you're involved in government operations, the government has a greater capacity to not acknowledge you were even there. So when things go wrong, you don't have the government's backing. So there's an incentive for you not to get involved anyway. So we think doctors will not be involved in this if their license are stripped. But we argue the second thing is, if your license is going to be stripped, that means your future capacity to even do this. The United States does not torture terrorists in bundles. We don't have 100 terrorists coming in every day all the time. That means that either A, there's no incentive for them to structure their monetary life around torturing terrorists. There's an incentive for them to structure around clinics and helping people on the ground. So a license is the most important aspect, if indeed that is the metric for which a doctor has to do his life. So we said that's a large incentive for most doctors to not be involved. One or two doctors might still break this and get involved, but we think that's a minimization of harm, where we have to make them pick between the civil population, and now worst case scenario, less doctors are involved
overcrowded. Why?
in terrorist mess. Sure.
Given that you cut the supply of food for them instead.
I'm so sorry, can you repeat that again?
Given that you cut the supply, make the demand even more for a government who wants to have doctors to participate in torture, and then the supply of doctors in mainstream practice is already so much. Why are you not incentivizing these doctors to go into torture?
Oh, okay. So if there's so many doctors right now, that means they are incentivized to just forgo their license and get involved with the doctors. Well, we don't think that's the calculus. Even there's a saturation of doctors that still does not mean you get lucrative amounts of money for opening clinics and like moving to other areas and like migrating to other countries, or just being a doctorism a better alternative than getting involved in the National University of Singapore. We don't understand why that's the case. So the third issue in this debate is this the duty of doctors? And is this an inherent thing we must do? So the first question is death a word for me? So long as so forth is the Hippocratic oath is being fulfilled and we keep lives for as long as we can, therefore our obligation as doctors is beneficial. So the first thing we will say is, you are not going to operate on the will of the terrorist. It does not matter what the terrorist wants. If the terrorist says, don't resuscitate me, you're not going to listen to him. You're going to listen where we put you in a bus, the principle of consent of your patients, so you can go back home. We give you medical treatment to put you back in the same hellhole for you to get psychologically traumatized. So if your metric is psychological trauma is horrible and these people go through horrible life, and that's a good thing to put in court, therefore we say that same metric can be used to adjudicate that your life is horrible. So we would say that person would rather die. We think that individuals should actually die for the doctor to remain a neutral person who is indifferent in adjudicating human life. But the second thing in this issue is, if indeed that's the case, are doctors acting morally? Is this a moral thing to begin with? If doctors were complicit in perpetuating harm and keeping them alive, we think that's a direct contradiction to the Hippocratic oath. So how is keeping someone alive beneficial when death prevents future harm? We think that's the metric we must use in adjudicating this debate. At the end of the debate, Mr. Speaker, it's not about whether or not we can essentially remove torture, but if we can minimize the harms, we are supremely proud to do that.
Yeah, sorry, just debate keeper. If torture is ineffective and torture gives wrong information, it is not the burden of doctors to stop torture. If it is ineffective, if it often gives inaccurate information, you should lobby the government to stop this policy. But the fact that the government is still continuing this policy, even though it is ineffective, even though it used the wrong information, even though they get bad rep for it, this means that there must be some effect to it. You are essentially lobbying the wrong crowd. You are asking the very persons with the capability to save the life of these terrorists to not go in. And we think that is a harm by itself. Because now, not only torture is not stopped, because under our paradigm, the government is still going to torture because you do not disincentivizing them from torture, but you remove the safety net that prevents these terrorists from dying. Right. I have 3 issues in today's debate. Number 1, will torture still happen either way? Number 2, will government still be able to get medical professionals to participate in torture? Number 3, will governments now treat terrorists nicer? Now, but before that, a few rebuttals, right? Now, firstly, they say that, well, you know what, at least having bruises will make this government accountable. In status quo, even if these bruises are hidden, even though they get treatment to hide these bruises, at least they are still alive to show these bruises, right? It's useless if they die in the process. It's useless if they do not survive to have their day in court. If they do not survive to tell their accounts of torture, it is very easy for government to say, well, this terrorist committed suicide in prison. And then there will be no one to dispute these claims, because now, so these terrorists, at the end of the day, if torture still happens, they'll simply not survive to see the end of it. And then they say, well, if you have no license, government will not acknowledge that you are there, and if things go wrong, no one will help. That's a problem. Because if government can already not acknowledge that they are there in the first place, why not they just do it in the status quo, so these people's medical licenses will not get revoked, right? If your government has the ability to acknowledge that they are not there, that means your policy is useless. Then they say, well, license is the most profitable thing, so a lot of doctors will still opt for licensing, right? Wrong. Torture is an ongoing thing, right? There are always need the medical professionals at Guantanamo Bay, and since we are involved in a lot of operations in the Middle East, they will still need doctors to participate in hitting these prisoners for a very long time. So we see no problem in government keeping these doctors on payroll. But the problem here is you are cutting the supply of doctors going into this field, creating a demand. Worse still, you are making their incomes higher, because now the government is not only paying them to provide medical services, they are paying them for the lost opportunity cost of having their licenses revoked, which means that doctors will now demand higher pay, and the government, given that if they still want to have doctors there, they will be willing to give that higher pay. Before moving on to my issues, yes. Anyone?
If doctors are no longer, the worst thing is not that Ali dies, because if Ali dies, we start questioning, where was Ali? We gave him to you, he died. People will start questioning why he's no longer there. The worst thing is when Ali lives, but he comes out to the public with no bruises, and no one believes him. This is exclusive to a doctor's ability to procure anal rehydration, so you don't get bruises.
We think Ali would much rather live to see the day of light and be able to complain about having no bruises rather than dying, right? And even if they die, even if people question, it is very easy for government to come up with a counter narrative, given that there are no medical professionals available. And even if people question why Ali suddenly went missing, I'll prove to you in my third issue why people will simply not care. Now, first one, will torture still happen either way? Yes. We told you how the topmost consideration for this government when they do torture is the information to extract to save the life of the citizen. It is a matter of national security. Often when this government, they procure medical professionals to treat these terrorists, these are often information versus secondary consideration, right? We see that if you remove the safety of this torture, then they say, well, at least we remove the capability of government to torture effectively, because now they cannot resuscitate these people. They did not answer my POI. Government will still get people who are medical professionals to help out. Then they say, well, doctors will not opt for this because torture is a one-off thing, not really profitable. We have shown you how torture takes a very long time. And our government is more than willing to keep it on payroll, given that they are paying them to maintain national security. US spends 5% of its national budget on national security. What makes you think they will not be willing to pay for these doctors? And even if they don't hire medical professionals, they will just hire unlicensed or unqualified medical professionals, because you don't need to be a licensed doctor to give us first aid or to resuscitate, right? But now the harm is even more, because these terrorists might be open to a lot of form of medical negligence, since these people don't really know what they're doing, right? Then there are still people who will hide bruises under your status quo, because you don't need to be a doctor to hide bruises. You can just hire a makeup artist or hire an RC, right? Now, but more importantly, once you revoke these doctors' licenses, you remove their ability to opt out of the system once their license is revoked. Because under status quo, if a doctor cannot stand the situation within Guantanamo Bay, he can still opt out with his medical license intact, right? Or he can still opt out and to whistleblow about to the public. If you revoke the licenses, that means they only have the government to depend on. You remove their ability to complain about the abuses that happen, because now they are wholly dependent on the government. This is my second issue. Will government still be able to get medical professionals? Given that we've already proven to you how this will happen, the practical outcome is this. Once you decide to revoke the license, three things will happen. Firstly, government will still hire doctors and keep them off the record. Even if you find out and you revoke the licenses, this makes these medical professionals wholly dependent on the government. And thirdly, government might just do away with the professional medical professionals entirely, because their primary concern is still the safety of their people, right? Then third issue, will government treat terrorists nicer? They said that this will cause government to stop torture, that they will refuse to even punch or torture the terrorists and invite them to tea and bribe them with biscuits for information, right? We said that this will not happen. They said that we are willing to go for all other alternatives. If these alternatives are useful and they work, we will not resort to torture in the first place. Under status quo, government will still opt to go for all these other alternatives and still torture, right? So we said that government torture will still be the most effective way to get information. And then government will, and then even if people know, they won't act against it. Why? NSA outrage. People knew that NSA is spying for them. Yet there was outrage about it, but no action was taken, because people still understand at the end of the day it is for their national security. People are willing to sacrifice these rights for the sake of national security. Right. Secondly, every time a terrorist bombing goes on, people sign into Patriot Acts. Even the French Senate is considering to sign into another form of French government's Patriot Act. Right. So since people might talk about it, but people will not act about it, and this is when government will still participate in torture, as long as you do not stop the government's mindset, but you stop medical professionals from going in, which is worse for terrorists of information, and because of this policy that's hard to oppose.
What was the debate about? The debate was supposed to be about whether or not doctors should be there when these guys are being tortured, whether the presence of a medical official should be there when torture is being occurring. But what was the debate that we got from that side of the house? They wanted to talk about torture as a whole. Is torture good or not? Will torture work? But we engaged with that. We did not dismiss. We still proved to you why torture is a viable option. Why was torture a viable option? Simple. It's a matter of national security. We've told you. They've asserted lots of false claims that informations are not reliable. Terrorists would just lie. But come on, guys. We have your own intelligence, your own CIA. We will not just they simply buy into whatever you're saying and not have our own intel. That is not a contention in today's debate. Because even then, we still engage further and tell you why torture is still a viable option, why torture is that. But the real debate is about what happens during the torture room. If the doctor's presence is necessary, and what happens if you strip their license. Because the Prime Minister came out here and talked about Prime Minister came up here and talked about, I quote, by reduce their medical license, torture will stop. We've given you analysis on why it wouldn't stop. We've engaged on all of their levels on why people will still be hired, governments will still look for them, because their claim and their assertion was simple. If you don't have the medical license, therefore you don't know how to torture. That is not true. Just because you lose a certain capability, and therefore governments will still hire these guys. We still engage with them. But what was our best case scenario that our best case scenario is this, and that is what we do not want. We adhere that because ours to be there, we want them to be alive. What was their response? No guys, them being dead is better than them being alive without bruises to show to the public. That was their whole case. They want to show bruises to the public. So we have come to a point that torture is going to happen. So the second issue, bruises. They want to show bruises so that people will care. But my speaker has already told you why people are not going to care, because it's a matter of national security. Even if people care, since when has that stopped the government? Since when has that stopped the United States of America? We've shown examples, even during the Bush administration. The polls showed that we should not invade Iraq, but the government still went into it. Why? The polls say that we should not torture, we should not torture. We still torture. And we will still do it. Will these guys die or not? Because they claim that these guys wouldn't die. When there's no medical official or personnel there, we are not going to hurt them. We are not going to throw punches to them. Where's the logic in that? I've already told you that the government would always have an impetus to garner information out of these people. Therefore, their claims of without a doctor there, we will not punch the terrorist is wrong. You would still beat the crap out of the terrorists because you would still want the information. And under your logic, how would you would eventually hurt them? You are still going to beat them. The question is, do you want a doctor or do you not want a doctor in the room? We tell you the problem is people are going to die because people who are your hardcore black ops CIA, they're not going to know. They are not medical practitioners. They are just brutal, violent people who will do whatever it takes to get information. Who is there to provide a check and balance? Doctors. And that was our whole case. At this end of the debate, the question that we need to ask is not whether torture is good or bad. It's not whether torture is good or bad. The question is, do we want a doctor in the room or not? And what are the practical harm? We've shown you the practical harm of why having an absence of a doctor in that room is pretty harmful. Therefore, we oppose.
Undoubtedly, my favorite part in the debate was his opening line that said, this debate about torture. My first question that I have to ask in reply is what ought be our stance on torture? Their main thrust of the case is this: if torture didn't work, why do we keep doing it? The USA does it, so it must work. Aha, prove that. Okay, this is the thing. We don't debate based on what is true, rather based on what should be true. We think governments mess up all the time. Should stop torture, for Obama to stop Guantanamo Bay, then we think the democratic will of the people should be carried out, and that's why we're happy to be heard on torture. But given that it's a debate on torture, I asked you very simply in my POI, what's your stance on torture? But then she told me this: on both sides, torture is going to happen anyway, so I don't have to take a stance. So she opted out of taking a stance, but then later decided to take the stance in reply by saying it's always going to be national security. I hate to use big debate words, but I'm sorry, harm minimization in torture, if that's what you want, happens best in government, because we've proven for people to come up with new innovative ways to harm people. You stop the ability to bring people back from the dead so you can keep pushing them to death. You lose the ability to hide injuries and therefore screen off protection on your agencies, your torture agencies, from public scrutiny and pollsters that you seem to disregard. If you're talking about totalitarian of you to ignore the needs of your population and continue torturing, even if you, especially since you never engaged with any of our analysis saying why torture is bad and we should do anything and we can up to that point. Next question, what's a doctor's responsibility? Because she says doctors must always save lives. They're a force for good. Let's be very clear. The intention of the doctor here was not to save your life and return you to welfare so that you can live a better life. The intention, in full rational calculus, was to keep you alive, to subject you to more pain. If you want to protect the moral sanctity of doctors, if you want doctors to sleep better at night, that's best protected under team government. So given that all of this has been blown apart, the last thing that they have is the almighty feasibility argument. Will it work? I wish this debate could progress to principles and talk about why it should work rather than whether it will work, but let's deal with it anyway. Will it work? We say, all right, ignore the fact that no matter how saturated your market is going to be, a long drawn-out career in medicine is always going to be more profitable to me than being an underground private contractor for the government in torture. Simply this, medicine, as you will learn in the rest of this debate, pays a lot, and even if the market is saturated, it's always more beneficial for me to be in clinics rather than a government that, should I be caught, won't protect me because it needs to save its own skin. Governments won't admit they've been licensed. I can no longer practice and make money. Worse, we'll just send you to jail if you want bigger deterrence. Whatever we can do, we will do to make sure doctors don't opt in. You said it decreases the potency of doctors to opt out. I don't care because I don't want them to have anything to opt into to begin with. That's what we prefer at the end of the day. Finally, the question is this. What if Ali died? Because that's the debate, right? If Ali died, they said that's bad, end of the world, you failed. No, you have to understand, when Ali dies, when the government suddenly go missing, that's when we can start questioning torture. That's when we can actually start putting pressure on governments who torture, and in future Alis don't have to die. Finally, we have some accountability when people can come out with bruises and prove that torture has happened. When the CIA no longer gets dragged to court, I can say, look, our people don't have any torture. Guantanamo Bay is just a detention center. When governments lose its ability to hide, that's when Ali doesn't have to die anymore. Not now, but 10 years from now. Thank you.
Hey guys, all right, get up, work out as soon as possible.